This video demonstrates the practical application of the risk registers technique as described in the methodology playbook of FEMA's The Full Spectrum Risk Knowledge Base. This technique will be used to explore the risks associated with a reduction in the maintenance division of a subway system operator. The scenario or topic presented is fictional and participant discussion should not be interpreted as FEMA policy or guidance. This technique will be shown through a combination of screen navigation and voice recording. Today we will be using the risk registers technique to explore the risks related to downsizing the maintenance division of the subway system operator in our jurisdiction. This would involve a reduction in division personnel and other resources. A risk register is a tool commonly used for risk management that helps stakeholders identify, assess, and manage the risks associated with a certain decision or project. Risk registers can be found in text documents, spreadsheets, or databases. There is no set standard for how a register must be put together. However, the most effective format is generally a table structure using a database or spreadsheet. A risk register should be used when an organization or institution is making a decision or pursuing a project where uncertainty exists and risk must be managed. A risk register is also useful in tracking risk information so that one generation of risk managers can transfer their knowledge, information, and analysis to the next generation. Therefore, in essence, a risk register is an educational tool as well as a historical reference that allows for the measurement of risk management over time. It is a living document that should be constantly updated, referenced, and revised in order to facilitate effective risk identification and management. The method consists of 9 steps. The first is to build the risk register. The second is to identify the risk by name. The third is to include the date the risk was identified. The fourth is to describe the risk that has been identified. The fifth is to assess the likeliness of occurrence. The sixth is to assess the severity or impact of the occurrence of the risk. The seventh is to identify the countermeasure. 8 is to identify the owner of risk. And then step 9 is to indicate the status of the risk. As I mentioned, we are building a risk register to document the various risks associated with the decision to downsize the maintenance division of the subway system operator in our jurisdiction. So let's go ahead and get started. For part 1 of step 1, we need to determine the format of the risk register. A spreadsheet is a common and useful format for a risk register, so we will go with that format. Part 2 of step 1 is to determine the organizational tool we will use. For our purposes, we will be using a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. For part 3 of step 1, we need to enter in the risk register attributes across the top of the spreadsheet. These go at the top of each column. So we're going to enter the date, the risk name, the risk description, the risk type, the likeliness of occurrence rating, severity of occurrence rating, countermeasures, risk owner, and status. These all go in the top fields. The methodology playbook provides a PDF document that can be used to complete this step. A link to the PDF can be found on the risk registers page. Step 2 is to identify a risk. The first risk I will enter is service delays. With a reduction in personnel and other resources, the subway system operator will not be able to respond to urgent maintenance needs as quickly as it has in the past, when it had robust staffing and ready access to resources necessary to ensure smooth subway operations despite maintenance issues. Now, for step 3, I simply enter the date that this risk was identified. Dates are important because the risk register is a living document, and it is helpful to know when certain risks were identified or modified. If I were to go back and change this risk entry somehow, I would change the date to reflect when it was last modified. Moving on to step 4, we need to fill in a short description of service delay risk. This step fills in both the risk description and risk type fields in the spreadsheet. Information in this field can include the type of risk, whether it's structural, financial, business-related, etc., the classification in terms of whether it is intentional, malicious, accidental, or random, and also the consequences of the risk. For the service delay risk, I'm covering the fact that service delays will ensue because the subway operator will not be able to respond quickly to maintenance problems, thus leading to a disruption in normal operations. I'll also specify that this is an operational risk. In step 5, we assess the likeliness of occurrence, or in other words, the occurrence rating. The likeliness of occurrence addresses the question, what is the likeliness that the particular failure mode caused by the particular failure mechanism will occur? We can use a basic assessment where we deem an occurrence as having a low, medium, or high occurrence, or we can use a more detailed assessment. For this example, I will use a detailed ordinal scale from 1 to 10 to give a more specific assessment. Using this scale, 1 means the event is extremely unlikely, and 10 means that it is extremely likely. These ratings only hold significance in comparison to each other, as the scale is subjective and based on organizational knowledge, experiences, and records. The scale is uniquely tailored to this risk study, so is not directly applicable to any other context. When assessing the likelihood of occurrence, it is useful to determine a defined time frame. For this risk register, I'm using the calendar year as the time period. For the risk of service delays, I'm assigning an occurrence rating of 8, because as maintenance needs grow throughout the year, it will lead to more and more delays as there are not enough resources to handle problems quickly. Moving forward to step 6, this is where we assess the severity or impact of the occurrence of the risk. In this step, we are addressing how severe the occurrence of service delays would be on the subway system. Again, we are going to use an ordinal scale from 1 to 10 to score severity, with 1 being no significant impact and 10 being catastrophic. This scale has again been developed and tailored specifically for this study and is based on the organizational knowledge of the subway operator. For this risk, service delays, I've rated it as a 6, meaning that this occurrence would have a moderate to elevated impact on the subway system, as train delays would frustrate riders and perhaps lead to reduced ridership. This risk is more associated with inconvenience and lost revenue, rather than critical safety issues or dangerous conditions. Moving on to step 7. This is where we identify countermeasures that can be used to prevent, reduce, or transfer the risk away from the subway system. When thinking about possible countermeasures, it is useful to consider such questions as, can we eliminate one or more modes of failure? Can we mitigate the risk? Can we reduce the severity of the risk? And can we develop early detection warnings? We know that service delays, or at least the severity of delays, can be reduced by enacting a proactive system monitoring and repair program, so that any problem in system function can be dealt with immediately and effectively. Being able to effectively manage routine and emergency maintenance problems would prevent the service delays that could result from an underfunded and understaffed maintenance division. Next, in step 8, we identify the owner of risk. This is important as it specifies the individual who is responsible for managing and monitoring the risk identified, therefore limiting any confusion that could lead to the risk being unmanaged. For service delays, I'm entering in subway system maintenance supervisor and scheduler. He or she will be responsible for keeping track of any maintenance problems that arise and could affect train operations and will have to take appropriate actions. This field can also include the name of the individual in charge, but it is more important to include the position because different people may occupy the position throughout the generations of officials that implement the risk register. Finally, moving on to step 9, we need to indicate the status of the risk. In this step, we are basically characterizing the risk to describe whether the risk is an active concern or if it is no longer relevant. Because service delays are caused by unpredictable maintenance problems, this risk is a continuous risk that must always be managed, as numerous events could cause delays. We have now completed the first column of the risk register for the service delay risk. As I mentioned earlier, the risk register is a living document, meaning that our subway system will continue to use, modify, and add to this spreadsheet. As you can see, there are multiple risks associated with a reduced subway maintenance division that have been added to the risk register. All of these risks must continue to be monitored, managed, and documented. It is important for the subway operator to continue to pursue risk identification and management, as this document is never considered complete, and there are always risks associated with different operational and business activities. That completes the risk register's exercise. Thank you for watching.